Here we go then. Netflix and I have a bit of a rocky relationship. On the one hand, I think they've delivered some genuinely unique and remarkable TV shows over the past few years, and I respect their willingness to take risks on interesting and unproven concepts that other, less adventurous TV networks would pass up. But then every so often they try their hand at making movies, and the results are mixed to say the least.
That's my fucking arm.
So I guess I'm always a little cautious when they trot out a new film with a predictably obtuse marketing campaign that sets up an intriguing mystery and promises satisfying answers. However, in the case of Birdbox, it turns out my reservations were entirely justified. Birdbox is a movie with many problems, and I'm going to outline them in a minute, but for anyone who's been living under a rock for the past few weeks, here's the basic gist of the story. The movie centres around a woman named Mallory, played by Sandra Bullock, an expectant single mother getting ready for the birth of her first child. We'll ignore the fact that Bullock is now in her mid-50s and clearly looks like she's had some work done recently. It's the magic of cinema, I suppose. She's on her way home from a hospital checkup when suddenly people start killing themselves all around her and naturally chaos ensues. Why do I feel like I've seen this before somewhere?
What? No!
Oh, never mind. Anyway, cars crash, things explode, people get run over, and when her system falls victim to the suicide plague, Mallory takes refuge in a nearby house with a small group of other survivors and tries to figure out what to do next. The movie then cuts forward to events 5 years later, where Mallory is now the sole guardian of two small children as they struggle to survive in a devastated world, forced to wear blindfolds when they're outside as they make a hazardous journey towards a promised place of safety. Naturally, since they can't see their environment, navigation is extremely difficult, as is their ability to counter potential threats. The narrative shifts regularly between these two setups, gradually filling in the blanks of how Mallory came to be the sole survivor of the group, why the blindfolds were necessary, and what the hell happened to the world. Sounds promising, right? Well, it might be if we ever got any real answers. Birdbox plays out like a mashup of different concepts and genres awkwardly flung together in the hopes that it will produce a semi-competent end product. You've got your standard end-of-the-world scenario where society collapses, leaving only scattered bands of lucky survivors. You've got your cabin-in-the-woods type horror section where a group of characters are trapped together by an unknown threat and gradually fall apart as their situation becomes more desperate. All the usual stereotypes are present and correct. There's the drug dealer who can't be trusted, the asshole survivalist who's hostile to outsiders, the geek who's there to give us exposition, the resourceful beefcake love interest, the suspicious late addition, and the naive woman whose kindness proves to be their undoing. I can't even remember their names, they're so generic. You've also got your post-apocalyptic world where food and water runs low, forcing people to risk their lives on dangerous supply runs and compete against other survivors for limited resources. And lastly, you've got your wilderness survival stretch where characters must venture through a harsh and unforgiving world where the natural environment can be just as deadly as the creatures hunting them. And that brings me neatly along to one of the biggest flaws of this film. The creatures in Bird Box are without doubt the weakest aspect of the whole production, in the sense that they effectively don't even exist. The basic premise, from what little the movie actually gives us, is that they're some kind of invisible force moving around the world. You can't see them visually, but looking in their general direction will cause your eyes to glaze over and prompt you to kill yourself immediately, by any means possible. Even viewing them through a TV screen will cause the same effect. It's a bit like watching Amy Schumer's stand-up routine.
I don't know why, but I want to put my penis right in your butthole.
They can't pass through walls or doors, so barricading yourself in a fortified house will hold them at bay, and covering your eyes will prevent them from killing you, meaning it's probably a good idea to wear blindfolds if you're venturing outside. Now, it's an interesting enough premise, and it raises some intriguing questions for the viewer. What exactly are these creatures? Where did they come from? What do they want? What's their true form? Why have they never appeared until now? Will they ever leave? Why does looking at them cause you to commit suicide in the first place? Do they do this intentionally, or are they even aware of it? If it's intentional, then why? Do they have the same effect on animals? If they're invisible, why do they cast shadows on windows? If they can't interact directly with the environment and seem to have no physical form, why can't they pass through solid objects? Why do some people look at them and not kill themselves, but just kind of go mad and become obsessed with making others see them? As I say, interesting questions, but unfortunately the movie provides us with no answers. I mean, absolutely none. We're never given the slightest clue as to the true nature of these creatures, where they come from or what they're doing here, and it's unbelievably disappointing. I mean, I'm all for a bit of mystery, especially in horror-type movies like this, but the point of a mystery is that you have to provide some kind of resolution for it eventually, and Birdbox makes no attempt to do so. Everything is left open and unanswered. We know as much by the end of the movie as we did at the start. It's like J.J. Abrams wrote this script. Things are just plopped in to service the plot, or because they seemed like a good idea at the time. Insane humans infected by the creatures pop up occasionally so they can have a couple of gunfights with actual enemies that can be killed. The blindfolds provide an element of tension because characters can't see what's around them, but since the creatures can apparently see them and can't attack them physically, it makes no real difference. People carry guns for protection, but it's never made clear if bullets have any effect on the creatures, so it seems kind of a moot point anyway. The ending is set up as a positive, happy future for the main character, but it ignores the fact that she's still imprisoned in a building with all the same resource concerns as before, and deadly monsters roaming right outside. If you really think about it, it's kind of a nightmare scenario that's going to leave her terrified for the rest of her existence. I expected a satisfying payoff to this interesting setup, but I came away from Birdbox feeling cheated. People sometimes claim the questions are often more interesting than the potential answers when it comes to movies like this, but personally I just interpret this approach as a lack of confidence on the part of the screenwriters, like they couldn't think of anything clever to say or do, so they just left the entire thing unresolved and hoped we wouldn't notice. Well, we did. On a slightly more positive note, credit to Sandra Bullock for her performance here. She gives it her all, portraying a character who's both compassionate and ruthless when she needs to be. Bullock's been taking on more challenging, dramatic roles later in her career, and hopefully she continues on this path because she's damn good at it. The movie's competently shot, making only limited use of CGI for some of the explosion scenes, and the production value seems good for a Netflix original. Overall, Birdbox is an underwhelming, undemanding sort of movie that takes no risks and pushes no boundaries, fails to challenge the viewer, and certainly doesn't live up to its premise. It could also do with losing about 20 minutes of padding to bring the runtime well under 2 hours. It's not terrible and it'll probably keep you amused for a while, but don't expect too much from it. Overall, I'd give it 6 out of 10, and that's me being generous.